really, we have experts in just about every field here, so hopefully it'll be a very engaging conversation. So, Graham Allison, here I'll start with you. I mean, possibly, the world's foremost expert on international affairs, on national security. He was Assistant Secretary of State under Clinton, but again, one of the world's most prominent authors, professors, thinkers on all issues of national security. Also my professor years ago, which, that's my claim to fame, and sort of with special expertise on some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. So sort of nuclear weapons, Russia, China, all the issues that are going to be front and center at the new administration. Ian Bremmer, right here to my left, political scientist, founder of Eurasia Group, sort of the man of geopolitical risk around the world, also founder of G0 Media, and again, one of the most prominent analysts of geopolitics, of geopolitical risk. Author, I believe, of 11 books last time I checked. So Walter Mead, again, another global expert in strategy, statesmanship, currently at the Hudson Institute, but has been a fellow in many, many organizations, a writer, fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, and again, one of the world's foremost experts on issues of strategy and global strategy. Alison Schrager, economist at the Manhattan Institute, but she has worked throughout. She's also a prolific writer, but has worked in finance, in policy, in media, and she's going to decipher the big questions over what the economy is going to look like under Trump nationally and internationally. So I'm going to jump right in, and I am going to start with you, actually, Alison, because I think actually, before I start with you, I have let's take a pause. A lightning round for each of you. I would like to ask each of you to describe in one word what yesterday was. Ian.
Complicit.
Exciting.
Vibe shift.
Trump.
Very good. Okay, Alison. So one of the things that we did not see yesterday, I mean, the flurry of executive orders and of diktats and of things that were said, we did not see actually much on the economy. There was little action either on trade or on tariffs. I mean, President Trump did say that on February 1 he will slap a 25% tariff on Canada and on Mexico, but in general there wasn't much that we was expecting. His emphasis, as we know, was at immigration, regulatory issues, climate, and also pardoning the January 6 defendants. So does this change what you think this administration will do pretty quickly on trade and on the economy, just based on the first 24 hours?
No, I would have been shocked if he put on tariffs on day one. I read through the executive order he did do on tariffs, and the key word was review and assess. So I think with Trump, something I've come to understand about him is, he sees himself as a deal maker. So he sort of puts out the maximalist position and then goes from there. So I think what markets pretty much been pricing in is there'll be some tariffs, but they're largely a negotiating tool to get better deals, which in and of itself I think is significant. I mean, I think we breathe a sigh of relief with that, but it also is a big change. One, that we're doing more sticks, fewer carrots when it comes to sort of the global trade order, and two, moving away from, I mean, it seems like in the post-war era, we had this idea that better trade policy came from international, these big multilateral organizations coming up with trade policy that made sense for, the whole world. I mean, whether or not, I think that did work pretty well for a while. Whether or not that was still working is debatable. But this is more sort of, we'll see a lot more bilateral deals or more sort of deals amongst sort of smaller groups of countries, and that's a big change. So even if this well, they're not going to be the big tariffs we expected. This is a deal-making proposition. I think it does represent a very big shift in terms of sort of the global, post-war economic order. And, in some ways that's bad. In some ways, though, it is good. There were problems with what we had before. Certainly, I think if there's one thing I noticed he seemed very focused on was China. And it's not like we were in a free trade utopia with China before. So I think right now I'm optimistic about a lot of his economic policies. I think they are going to result, at least initially, in higher growth, although higher debt and potentially changes to the dollar, but and also potentially higher inflation. I think people forget that more than 20 years ago we used to see high growth go with high inflation. So I think that's all in the pipes. But right now his economic policy is certainly sort of more wait and see.
Just let me push you on China. So, he said he wants to go right away. Still you, Alison, what's your prognosis there? What do you think will be the first moves?
With China? Probably tariffs of some kind. I expect, he'll probably keep a lot of the Biden ones. Biden put a lot of said certainly restrictions on technology with EVs, so he'll probably keep that and probably negotiate. Maybe not 60%, which is what he threw out. Again, he goes with a maximalist position and goes down from there. But probably there will be less trade with China going forward.
Yeah. Let me turn to you. I want to, you were nodding on China, so feel free to jump in on China, but I was going to ask you about, on the geopolitical stage about Ukraine, which is another one of the hot issues that we're expecting right now. President Zelensky is addressing the forum today, and President Trump has said that one of the first things that he would do was find peace for, in the Russia-Ukraine war. How likely is that? What are you expecting? What do you think Trump will do vis-a-vis sanctions on Russia on the one hand and military aid for Ukraine on the other?
Well, anybody whose crystal ball is clear probably hasn't understood the problem, so it's hazy. But I would say if you try to take Trump seriously, but not literally, and you take the time to watch his antics and watch the rallies and watch the tweets and read between the lines, you can get some pretty good clues about what's likely to happen. So I would predict that 6 months from now, the Ukraine war will be over. You asked about China. I think China will be part of the deal. I think that it'll settle roughly at the current line of division, which is where it will have settled a year ago or the year ago or the year ago. Trump's repeated line about this is endless, useless killing. Each year, Ukraine is in a worse position than it was the year before. This is set for a deal if there were a deal maker. And he's looking at it, and I think that's what will, I would suspect that'll be a big piece of it. Indeed, if you look at his inaugural speech and the press conference, he wants to be not only a deal maker, but an international deal maker who's a peacemaker. And he's got a very interesting sense for a war, which he's very strongly against. He's for preventing wars, he says. And in nuclear war, he in particular has a fixation. So I don't know if you remember in the debate, in the middle of the debate, he said, oh my God, there could be a nuclear war. That's a much more imminent danger than global climate. Kamala had no idea what he was talking about. Neither did the two moderators. They were thinking, hey, maybe he said Martians came, or, it's just something completely bizarre. He like Biden, and no other president before that since probably Reagan, has a feel for nuclear weapons. I suspect that there's a lot in this agenda. In fact, I have a piece that'll be published next week that asks the question, is Trump a China hawk? And I think if you look at what he said and did in the campaign, you'll find it's difficult to classify him in those terms.
Let me push you on the deal that you expect in 6 months. What would make Ukraine and President Zelensky accept such a deal at the current border, where they've reached?
A phone call that he'll have with him that says, you're getting no more money and no more arms if you don't accept the deal that I'm negotiating. And Zelensky will argue today, I'm sure, we could never do that, blah, blah, blah. He'll not have any options. A deal maker who, like Trump, who's in favor of using his leverage that he has to extract a deal that he thinks is good enough, would regard Biden's administration nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, he thinks that's stupid. Why would you say, if you're negotiating with somebody that's a weak partner, nothing about them without them? Why not negotiate over their head? Why should I be consulting them about something that they need from me? So I think you can see the outline of that deal. I think that deal has actually been, this is my personal view, on the table for 2 or 3 years if we had had an American diplomatic initiative, which we didn't.
And sanctions on Russia?
I think he will, it'll be interesting to see again, and I've been trying to read between the lines and pick up pieces of information about this. Undoubtedly, there's been conversations between him and Putin in between. So I suspect they've had a number of phone calls in which they have some understanding of each other. But I think his appreciation of the China angle, which I think is an important angle of the deal, would be that if he and she have agreed about something, Putin will agree.
You look like you were about to jump in on this. On Ukraine.
I can wait. That's fine.
Well, because I was going to move to the other big foreign policy issue, which is obviously the Middle East, and I was going to go to Walter. You know, Trump has taken credit, together with the Biden administration, for this first peace deal. The first phase of it is going to last, 6 weeks. So already at the beginning of it on Sunday morning, it looked like it might fall apart. Both sides are nervous. You are an expert on the Middle East. So, what is your take? Will this ceasefire hold? What are the prospects for long-standing peace? And also, the world that Trump inherits in the Middle East is very different than 4 years ago, with what we've seen just even in the last months, including most lately with Syria. So what are the chances for a real paradigm shift in the region with this administration?
Well, I think you can see a paradigm shift without peace. And that, in a sense, Israel has had a strategic problem since the 1940s, which that it wins wars, but can't then get to a stable, peaceful arrangement. And I think that remains the case. What we've seen is Israel managed, with a lot more help from the Biden administration, and the Biden administration was, in a sense, comfortable with providing, but did provide, to inflict an extraordinary series of defeats on Iran and its proxies. That has changed the Middle East in the sense that Iran today is not the power that it was a year ago. Personally, I think that's a good thing. But do we think that the Iranian challenge was the only factor destabilizing the Middle East, and now that factor has been reduced, everything will move along peacefully? I don't think that's actually how the Middle East works. Some years ago, I was lucky enough to visit the city of Çanakkale in Turkey, and I went to see the ruins of Troy. I stood on a mound of 13 cities over 3,500 years, each of which had flourished for a time and then was sacked and burned. And that suggests to me that peace in the Middle East is perhaps remains a beautiful but maybe distant dream.
Ian, I'm going to come to you on another issue. I wanted to see if you wanted to jump in on any of the foreign policy issues, or you, Allison.
Sure, in the sense that, first of all, on China, I don't disagree with what Allison just said, but I do think the U.S.-China relationship is probably the one that is most problematic to get a deal. I think that we are heading towards a trade war and towards a more strategic decoupling of the economies. One reason for that is because Trump isn't just focusing on tariffs on China, but he's also focusing on third countries where there are pass-throughs to the U.S. The only way the Chinese economy is succeeding right now is through their $1 trillion export surplus. And so you see Trump and his team focusing a lot on Mexico and India and Vietnam. The other conversations they're having bilaterally, one of the top priorities is squeeze China coming in. That's very hard for China to respond to. You've already seen Sheinbaum in Mexico. That's been her top priority. Before she meets with them, we've got a Mexico plan that is going to take the Chinese out, right? So I think that makes it much harder. And I also think China's complicated. And Graham knows this well. I mean, the only reason we've stabilized U.S.-China relations in the last year and a half is because there are 25 high-level cabinet-to-cabinet bilats channels that have been set up. There's an enormous amount of effort put into the relationship. So I agree with Allison that Trump has an orientation to meet with Xi and have a good meeting and, flatter him a little bit and say, come on, let's get to a deal. But getting to a deal with China will require a level of execution, implementation that's far more complicated across the Trump administration, not to mention some support from the GOP in Congress. We're nowhere close to that. So I actually think that in the coming months, we are heading to a dramatic shift in where the U.S.-China relationship is. That's the one on the foreign policy side where I would say we need to be paying attention to. Everybody here has a lot of equities at stake there, whether or not you're invested.
Well, you mentioned the GOP. Allison, the other big question is obviously, and you alluded to it, is inflationary pressures, right? Just a couple of days ago, Scott Bessent was saying, no, it'll be offset by currency fluctuations, it'll be offset by our negotiating power. But that is clearly an issue, right? That's sort of the nightmare for Trump.
Yeah, it's possible that could happen, but that assumes that everyone's consumption basket just adjusts just so, and we know that doesn't happen. I think there's going to be inflationary pressure on this administration, and I said for a lot of reasons. One, if we did do across-the-board big tariffs, we'd see an increase in the price level. It's not clear that would have a sustained higher inflation, but prices would go up at least initially. And also it is becoming kind of obvious that we're at potentially an equilibrium higher level of inflation, around 2.5–3%, which is just higher than we've had before. And that's going to mean, I think, a bigger challenge for this administration is higher bond yields. And I said I'm optimistic they have a pro-growth agenda, but it is going to be, deficits are going to increase too. There's nothing particularly fiscally responsible about their plans. So with higher interest rates, that could end up being a big issue. Trump is very sensitive to market feedback. And in his first administration, he is probably going to make permanent his tax cuts, but he was able to do that in a very low interest rate environment. It's, he's not only planning on making his tax cuts permanent, he's going to lower the corporate income tax probably. He wants to reduce the SALT deduction and, all these other things like tax on tips, all these things. And so he really does have a policy that is going to increase deficits, but he's also going to be facing higher interest rates, in part by the just higher level of inflation that he's not even causing, that just exists in the world. And that's going to, I think, pose a real challenge for him.
Yeah, exactly. Please, yes.
So I'll try to be contrarian here and a little bit more optimistic. So I think it's quite likely that we'll see a significant increase in the growth rate. I think the exciting of animal spirits is amazing. If you look at the billionaire cabinet, they're all self-made billionaires who think, well, heck, it should be 100 more similar people doing whatever we've done. Why can't there be? I think the reduction, the elimination of regulations that protected for green are gone. Drill, whatever. DEI gone. So a whole layer of regulatory activity. So I think, if at least the companies that I'm watching and listening to, they're all quite excited that this is going to be a positive environment for them.
Yeah.
So in that environment, I agree with you that there's some realities of economics that they're going to bump into.
Well,
and interest rates are what they are. Interest rates will have the impact, or inflation will have the impact. But I think that at least I can tell a story how this time next year we'll feel that the American economy had basically gone into this period of growth. That's the golden age
that he's referring to,
story,
that he'd referred to. Allison, were you jumping in?
Yeah, no, I agree. I said I think it's not only the deregulation. I think that, he wants to cut corporate taxes to 15%. I think that's also going to be very good for growth and the animal spirits. I think when I said vibe shift, I think one thing I never thought I would see in 2016 is people are really excited, and I think there is a feeling of positivity that is going to reduce a lot of growth. I said I worry long term that this is largely deficit financed.
By excited, you mean that some are really happy and some are terrified, right? That's what you mean.
Yeah, because I feel that the country's obviously polarized exactly.
Just a little.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a little.
But did you want to finish, Allison, and then we'll go?
But the he imagines he's going to reduce the deficit at the same time.
With growth.
Exactly. Now,
Right. I mean,
haven't
that
seen how
doesn't
those
necessarily follow.
Do you see those numbers conceivably working?
No, well, I mean, this is sort of the central fallacy that seems to be plaguing both parties now, is that there's this free lunch that I think the Biden administration thought that all their industrial policy would produce so much growth it would pay for what it costs. And I think they're falling for the old Republican sort of supply side idea that we can cut taxes to produce so much growth that will pay for itself. And I think these things both do produce growth, just not enough to pay for themselves.
Ian, did you want to jump in?
I just want to make sure that it's not that I disagree with a lot of what we said so far, but we don't want to treat Trump as if he's just another president. He's not. Don't normalize this, right? I mean, first of all, because of the amount of power that he has managed to amass, right? I mean, the Republican Party is his. It wasn't in 2017. He has won despite, in some ways, because of 2 impeachments, never happened before. Lots of felony charges and convictions, never happened before. And he won. He won the popular vote. He didn't win a massive mandate, but he won with people knowing this was a feature, not a bug. It's not like 2016. And he's also in a much stronger position globally because, of course, the United States, the economy is doing better after the pandemic. Technologically, the Americans are dominant in so many ways, especially compared to allies. And America's allies, many of their governments are in severe disarray. Right? While America's adversaries, China's in the worst economic position since the 90s, maybe the 70s. Russia's in severe decline. Iran's just lost its empire by proxy. So it's a very unusual time to have an individual that is in no way concerned about or constrained by rule of law. He's made that very clear. And now, what is he actually going to do? Is he going to be a dictator? No, I'm not in any way in that camp. But I do think one of the best ways to understand what Trump will do is to understand who pays him. Right? I mean, he flipped on TikTok. He was one of the first people that was opposed to TikTok, but he shifted because Jeff Yass and other investors paid him. And that's a good way to get Trump to do what he wants you to do. And we are seeing that. We saw it on the stage last night at the inauguration. And we'll see it at Davos, of course, but we'll also see it with all of the different leaders that are or aren't responding to the demands that he's making. The best way to get it done is not align your foreign policy with America strategically. It's not support U.S.-led multilateral institutions that he's not committed to. It's pay Trump. And by the way, there's now new crypto that allows you to do that. And by the way, I was critical when Hunter Biden launched his crypto coin too, which he didn't do, right? For a reason, because it's unprecedented. This is not, if India was doing this, we would say they were a kleptocracy. If Modi was on the phone with a head of state and Elon Musk showed up, we'd say this is a banana republic. But because it's the United States and it's Trump with Elon, it's actually the new way of doing things. I accept that that many of us will be complicit. I accept that many of us will find a way to get on with that, but that doesn't mean it's normal, right? And it doesn't mean that we should sit and pretend that it's suddenly okay, that this new presidency is just going to keep on keeping on. That is not the case. And because, final point for me, because Trump is not going to be here for long, I mean, in part because he's 78, but in part because he only gets 4 years, right? Then everyone that has done this is going to have to deal with the fact that next will be something else. And you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that, too. So long-term consequences here.
So you raised 3 issues, which were going to be the 3 topics of, that's why you should have been the moderator. No, you raised 3 important issues, which is the prospect that Biden talked about in his last speech, which was the oligarchy. Are we heading into a country of oligarchs?
And it was extraordinary that he discovered that on his last week of his presidency.
Well, and then of course, as you say, one of the most striking images of yesterday, as you say, was all the tech entrepreneurs, all the top who were sort of around, around Trump at the balls, at the inauguration, inside at all the events. So sort of oligarchy, is this an oligarchy? Is there a question of it? Is it ethical for Trump to launch a cryptocurrency, as he's becoming president? I think that's a question that we can legitimately ask. And then TikTok, and maybe so we'll take it in reverse order. TikTok, what is interesting to me about TikTok is that actually it is a microcosm of many things around Trump. One, TikTok, arguably some people say that Trump won because so many of his followers are on TikTok, so it's worth keeping it, right? On the other hand, he does, as you say, want to go and make a deal in China. Well, what could that deal be? Could it be half of TikTok without the algorithm stays in the U.S.? Somebody, big, entrepreneur, a Musk or somebody else could buy it, and so. There's a tension there. Also, he's lost 200, not only Trump, but 200 Republicans voted to ban TikTok last year. So could this be the first sort of challenge with the GOP, with his party, which is also an interesting topic. So I actually think TikTok is interesting. Yes, you wanted to jump in.
So the TikTok is a good example. I agree. And who made the biggest effort to try to get TikTok banned? Zuckerberg. Why? Because of competition.
Well, advertising.
Okay. No, because of his business.
Yeah, exactly.
They then excited a lot of national security people about TikTok and what could be listened to. And there's a concern. But as concern is how about compared to your iPhone? Where's your iPhone made? In China. Where's your laptop made? In China. Where's your keyboard made? In China. Oh my God. Could it be? Well, no, don't talk about that. That's mine. I use my iPhone. Tell me I can't use my iPhone. So that was the argument actually Trump used yesterday at his press conference. So I think it's a very complicated situation. I suspect that, if 170 million people like something, remember prohibition. It's not a very good idea to be against that. And Trump's not going to be against it if 170 million people like. Is there a deal to be done there? There's many deals to be done. And many that will be to somebody's advantage. Musk may buy the piece of it, or you may have a partnership. So I would say that's going to be an example. And I think, Ian, let me agree with completely, but kind of slightly disagree. I think but I think your main point, we shouldn't normalize Trump. Trump has done something no person in the world has ever done before. A dead man, a dead politician, has risen. Somebody who, if we were 4 years ago at Davos, he's buried, dead politically, known to me. He's now returned. This is the greatest comeback in political history of a politician. And then, therefore, he thinks he can do anything. There's a supreme confidence now about that. And lo and behold, this is a phenomenon that we shouldn't try to understand only in the terms that we're traditionally accepting. We should say something strange, new, and amazing is happening here, and we should study it. Yeah.
Walter.
I would agree with that, both Ian and Graham on that, and I think I'd add that we need to also factor in not only who's won, which is Trump, but who's lost, which is to say us. That is to say, the sort of general kind of intellectual, professional, managerial people who sort of thought that the world was basically, history was over and we were administering and trying to manage things according to rules that were all clear and known, and that history was kind of cumulative and that, tomorrow, even though we see this tech revolution happening around us, tomorrow's still going to be basically like today with incremental shifts. That's not how things work, and especially not how things work at this kind of moment when a technological transformation is really biting into the economy on all kinds of levels in a transformational way. And I guess I would throw into that the epitome of the us who is losing here is Europe. That the European Union and by and large its member states have misread the direction where events were going. Sorry, my mic. I'm usually pretty loud. I hope you can hear me. And that the European Union is the causes that it is interested in, climate, human rights, some others, as well as the methods of diplomacy that it prefers, are simply being gradually kind of marginalized as something new, not necessarily something better, but something new moves into the center.
Just a quick, just on Europe, as the European on the panel, I do think this is actually a great opportunity for Europe to sort of, kind of rise itself and get more of its act together with this administration. But I did want to ask, so what's more important in the next 4 years, tech or politics?
you can't separate them. Tech is transforming politics. Politics affects tech. But fundamentally, we are seeing something as earth-shaking as the Industrial Revolution, but instead of being compressed, extended over several generations, it's happening on a much more rapid time scale. And while the Industrial Revolution started in just a few places and only rather gradually spread across the world, the information era has moved much more quickly. So you have political crisis in a country like India where a billion people are on cell phones in the last, 10 or 12 years. And this has changed their relationship toward government, changed their relationship toward how they perceive the world, their own life chances, and so on. And so governments everywhere are sort of trying to run ahead of this massive change in public expectation, economic, social institutions. Of all illusions, the belief that we could somehow manage this smoothly and without kind of painful and even in some cases very discontinuous change, I think is maybe the greatest illusion of all.
Ian, you wanted to jump in?
That was covered.
Alice?
I just want to add, I think when a lot of economists are sort of shaking their heads that everyone is feeling like neoliberalism failed, because we're like, things went pretty well. The world got a lot richer. Even look at even in sort of richer countries, you see. Quality of life has gone up a lot. But I think what Walter's done is really the problem. And I wouldn't even say it's a problem, because I think what's happening in tech is largely representing a further improvement in our lifespan and progress. But it introduces a lot of uncertainty. It introduces a lot of change. And if we look back at the Industrial Revolution, we see a lot of the same patterns, which is rises in populism and sort of distrust and looking inward and blaming things like trade. Anyway, trade is really not at fault here. So
and massive international wars from time to time and domestic revolutions.
Yeah, and it took, people forget how disruptive the Industrial Revolution was. I mean, we look at it now and we're like, oh my God, we have indoor plumbing and all these wonderful things. But, it was a tough process, and it happened, as you point out, much slower and more gradually.
I think the future, there's a great book called Future Shock, and I'd say accelerated future shock is a big part of the story of what's happening.
Ian?
Yeah, I do think that it's interesting because the Democrats have been so divided over the course of the last years. The Republicans, of course, are much more united under Trump, but there are such massive differences in policy orientation between, dark MAGA run by Elon and people that want more free trade and want a deal on China and certainly are more globalist in orientation, the H-1Bs, TikTok, you name it, and deep MAGA. Right? I mean, the populists that are scared of the uniparty, are scared of the deep state, as they think of it, and believe that all of these people, no matter who they vote for, are just out to screw them. And they don't mind a big state, but they want a big state that's actually taking care of the average American. That divide is going to be papered over by the powerful personality of Trump, but that divide is not getting any weaker. And the anti-establishment forces in the United States, I think, are growing. I think as you see oligarchs become more powerful, and not just Elon. I mean, Elon's busy. He runs 6 companies. He's got 12 kids. He cares about at least a few of them. I mean, he's having a great time. There's only so much he can actually do. But the fact that the oligarchs are becoming so much more empowered is leading to pitchforks. And I was deeply concerned about Luigi Mangione and the way that a lot of people, not just on the internet, but like Elizabeth Warren and others, responded to almost lionize, oh, we can understand someone that assassinated a CEO a few blocks from where I live. Not okay. And I mean, if that kid that tried to assassinate Trump had been more charismatic and lived and had a few statements, I think he would have been responded to very differently. So I think what's being unleashed in the United States right now is not taken care of by Trump with a big win that everyone says wasn't stolen. Not at all. This is going to get a lot worse.
I'm going to turn to questions, but we have not sort of uttered the words sort of conflict of interest, and I do think we need to utter it for 1 second. I mean, is it okay to launch a cryptocurrency or to trade sort of political influence to make money? Question. Is that something that concerns anybody?
I would say we're in a new world in which that'll become the new normal for a while, and I agree in that there'll be a big resistance to it. But I think looking back at the robber barons and looking at the way that worked is an interesting historical analog that I've been looking at lately. And I think you see, I mean, again, you don't want to normalize Trump, but the Biden enterprises, if you look at the income on Biden enterprises and you look at his pardons, and say, and is it different from Trump? Yes, of course it's very different from Trump. The idea of launching crypto the day before is pretty bold. I think Ian's point about people who come, you pay $1 million to get a seat at the thing, but then you mainly kiss the ring and grovel, but then you're going to be more. Will Musk use his influence to advance his company's interests? Excuse me, that's my fiduciary responsibility as the chief executive. So I think it's going to be our traditional understanding of conflict of interest. I think some part of this is just more blatant. I mean, Trump is shameless, okay? A person who's already been accused of all the things that he's been accused of and you haven't been able to prosecute him yet, forget about it, okay? Forget about it.
Walter, and then we'll open it for questions.
The good news is I think we can look forward to an artistic renaissance in America because, I think about how Hunter Biden's promising artistic career. He went from nowhere to selling paintings for 20, 30, 40. I mean, I don't know how much he was selling. Now he can but I've never heard of a young artist who achieved so much so quickly. And now, without the pardon, without the problem of crime over his head and punishment, he can paint all day. It's going to be fabulous. But we are in a new era. It's in some ways it's not a prettier era. Ian's reminder that it will also be an unstable era, and that simply running to join the latest procession that can get you that can have long-term consequences. But it's different now. I think Henry Kissinger used to talk about how Trump was one of the individuals who came along from time to time and to sort of say to history, it was impossible to go on in the old way anymore. And I think here we are. He's a culmination. I think it was Bill Clinton that taught us all that shame only matters if you let it. That is, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you don't let all those people barking and screaming get in your way, you can move forward. In some ways, the Clinton Foundation enabled, money from all over the world to support an operation. But Trump has industrialized it and has really put a serious business person's mind to work on this new field of opportunities. He won't be the last, and I am not happy necessarily with where this is going, but we need to realize, again, the rule keepers, the people who believed in sort of professional responsibility, institutions, and all of those things, failed to do our job of keeping things working well enough so that ordinary people were happy with the kind of leadership and rules that we were providing.
Walter, we're going to get eggs thrown at us unless we allow the audience to ask some questions. I know you said really well. People sort of raised their hands. You had.
I just want to change the quote. Shame only matters when we let it, and we have. That's why I said complicity at the beginning. I worry that when the institutional order erodes and the Europeans are losers, we let shame not matter.
Gentleman at the back, please say your name if you would and who you represent.
Hi there, Ishan Tharoor of the Washington Post. I'd love to get your reactions. I mean, we talked to a certain extent about some of the foreign policy calculations that we have to contemplate, but how important is this kind of coalescing of what some describe as a kind of far-right international around Trump world, the links to the AfD, the sort of lionization of Javier Milei? Is this a kind of important feature of Trumpism in this term, the extent to which there's a pretty strong, intense feedback loop between Trump's Washington and ascendant far-right factions everywhere in the world?
That's a good question. We saw some elements even in South Korea, no, recently. Anybody want to take that?
The question is the answer, in a way, I think. Yes, there are connections. We're still exploring them. The movements are new and changing, and it's a phenomenon in a process of evolution and growth. Where it leads, it's very difficult to say.
I think Meloni is not a part of it. She went to Mar-a-Lago and all the rest. She's cutting deals with Elon. She's actually not a stronger version of Orban. Instead, she is someone who is quite close to von der Leyen. And I actually think that there is an understanding to use Meloni to try to figure out a way to ensure that Europe can stay together and deal with Trump. So I think that's an important one.
And, sorry, did you mean sort of at the kind of political level, or did you mean sort of grassroots also, or just among population? Both, yeah. Okay. Right here in the front, and then sorry, this gentleman here was first, and then. Go ahead, if you could speak loudly. It's a small room. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Gustavo Pimenta, CEO of Vale, the mining company. I was just curious about China, maybe to Ian and others. How do you think China would react to this Trump scenario going forward, especially given the challenges that they are facing these days?
Anybody take that? And then the fourth row on the left.
I think we're going to be surprised. So Ian and I, we should actually, one of the things I did this year was make lists of things in which I was wrong. And so it's good to try to be more concrete. So I'm betting this time next year, if we had the good fortune to have the conversation, we'll be surprised on the upside in the Chinese-American relationship. I think Xi and Trump have a very tight relationship. They get on very well. They understand each other. They both think of themselves as great men. They think of the rest of us as people that come along in the aftermath. They like each other in that respect. And so that's one place to start. Secondly, in terms of their interests, while fundamentally, in the long run, this is a Thucydidean rivalry of a rising and ruling power. So that's where I start. But if I look at the agency and the opportunities for agency here, doing a deal to conclude a war in Ukraine is not hard for Xi to be part of, and something that Trump wants to do, so they can do that. Well, Trump's concerned about trade deficits. What's the trade deficit with China? 320 or something like that. If I were Xi, I would say, I'm going to take the initiative. We're going to eliminate the bilateral trade deficit over 3 years. How hard is that to do? I just buy oil and gas from the U.S. and food, and rather than buying it from another source. So can I go through 7 things I can do that don't disturb me very much? Yes. And I think in terms of Trump's deals, I mean, for example, I think we'll see Panama. He will, quote, reclaim Panama and control of Panama. The couple of companies from China that are helping to operate the thing will go away. That's how big a deal is that for Xi? Not a very big deal. How big for Trump? He can declare that he. So I think there's a lot of deal space here for the two of them. And I think that the fact that Trump tried to get Xi to, I mean, actually, if you watch, this is again reading between the lines. Look and see what Trump said at the Notre Dame after the discussion with Zelensky. He writes a tweet, what happened. And then in the middle of the tweet, it says, China can help. Yeah. Doesn't say the UN can help, doesn't say Europe can help, doesn't say, it says China can help. If you look at his first press conference in January, it says, the U.S., quote, the U.S. and China working together can solve every problem in the world. I mean, that's Trumpian hyperbole. So I think I'm looking for the upside.
I'm on the other side of this.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right. I agree with you. That's what Trump wants to do. I think the Chinese are convinced that the Americans want to contain them. They have ample evidence of that fact. That is not just true of the Biden administration. That is true of everyone in Congress, and it's certainly true of Trump's broader national security complex. So I think that even though Trump is going to try to move in that direction to a degree, the ability and the willingness of the Chinese to get to a place that looks like a deal in that environment is not propitious. Do I have high confidence that? Never have high confidence that Trump can't do something, as Graham said, that's fair, but I would make a fairly strong bet that U.S.-China relations will be in materially worse condition next
Okay,
year.
so we have a good, clear bet. Good.
All right, you have a bet. We'll come back next year to see who wins.
Ardem Paraputian from Scripps, La Jolla, California. So 75 plus Nobel laureates, including me, wrote to senators saying that confirmation of RFK Jr. as Health and Human Services in the cabinet is irresponsible, and we think that he's not qualified. Not just that, his ideas are absolutely dangerous to the health of the American population. And I feel like there's very little outrage out there the second term. You guys talked about normalizing Trump, but overall I look at it and some of the appointments are full of people who are not qualified to do this. And so I'm wondering what some of the confidence that, again, that he could do things if he's surrounded by people who are not following fact-based ideas out there. Just wondering where the positivity is coming from.
Well, I mean, he has some good people, some less good people, but this is what we learned about Trump last time. He sort of puts in these people sometimes. I think he sees something about them he thinks is interesting, and he gives them a shot. He also fires them very easily. So, I mean, that's the upside. He takes risks with people. I mean, as an economist, I'm actually pleased with a lot of his appointments. I mean, I think even compared to Biden, he has much more sort of mainstream, well-trained economists than we had in the last administration. So I think to say he doesn't have any fact-based people around him isn't quite fair. He does have some people who maybe, you know, we should be more worried about. But again, recall, he fires people very easily. So there's that.
Walter, and then we're going to close.
And I would just very quickly say, too, that Trump is, he's casting a reality show as much as he is appointing a team of experts to actually run things. The cabinet, in many ways, in the United States has become a ceremonial function rather than an actual decision-making body or anything like that. And in many cases, you know, is a Pete Hegseth going to be sort of in the weeds on all the big issues in the Department of Defense? No, he won't be. Also, Trump is worried about guarding his right flank. There is MAGA beyond MAGA. There is politics beyond Trump. And he was elected by a coalition. People like RFK Jr. and some of these other appointments that he's making are represented in that coalition. He's trying to keep them under his tent while also not necessarily letting them set the pace or control his agenda. We need to think of Trump as a political manager of a very different kind of politics. And I think that helps explain some of the things both that happen and that don't happen.
I think that's a beautiful way to end. I want to say, folks, how lucky are all of us to have been hours after the inauguration to have been able to listen to this panel of experts. Really, I mean, you deserve really the round of applause. Thank you very much. And we'll close here. I think that I'll go back to just to close to what Ian said, that, you know, some are on the excitement side, some are on the fear side. I guess we will see where everybody in Trump's orbit, nationally and internationally, fits in that big ocean between. So thank you very much.
Good. Good.
Neil, welcome.